Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. So nice to be with you. I think a few people are still filtering in, but we will go ahead and get started with this January Second Sunday Dharma Series. So just a few details before we begin. Welcome again from wherever you're joining from. I'm Trisha Stotler, and I'm a teacher for IMCW, which is really how I kind of approach my hosting gig, is from the perspective of a teacher, but I'm also the executive director of programs here. And I moderate, I would say, most of these sessions, but occasionally other IMCW teachers come in and host as well. So this Second Sunday Dharma Series is a fundraiser for the Insight Meditation community of Washington. And we really want to thank those of you who are able to make a donation when you register for this event, or you can also do it after we're done. You'll have a follow-up message from Glenn that will also have a link to donations. It's really helpful to us, so we appreciate your generosity. So we gather together every month on the second Sunday, and we invite a well-known Dharma teacher, a beloved Dharma teacher, to come and share with us their perspective on what's going on in the world, what's up for them in their own practice. And we have a conversation. Sometimes they'll give a talk and a meditation. We always take questions at the end. And so you're always invited to join us. So you just need to register for each event individually. So this month, we are so honored to be talking with IMCW's founding teacher and beloved friend, Tara Brach. But before we begin, I first want to thank Miyako Villanueva, who is doing our ASL interpretation, and also our tech support team, who work kind of tirelessly behind the scenes here to keep everything running smoothly, and who are going to be helping you help take your questions. So just a note also that captioning is available that you can turn on at the bottom of your screen if that is helpful. We will be taking questions at the end of this session, and if you want to put them in the chat, there is a participant, our tech guy, who's named to ask questions here, actually our tech person who's asked questions here. So send your questions there, and just know that for this session, we would like to pull people up live to ask Tara their questions kind of on screen. So yeah, if you're willing to be on screen with Tara for your question, that would be great. Next month, the last thing, on February 13th, Stephen Batchelor will be joining us to talk about his book, The Art of Solitude. And I'm really looking forward to this one. Yeah, he'll be joining us from France, where he lives, and we're really excited about that. Okay. All right. So Tara, thank you so much.
Thank you, dear. And oh my gosh, it is just such a delight to, I'm looking at the gallery view and seeing you, and I'm seeing so many people that are beloved, dear, old friends, and so many beautiful, good hearts, new friends. So yeah, we'll start right in with a meditation so we get to all arrive together. This will be a short one. So the invitation is make yourself comfortable. Just be aware of whatever position you're in. Make those subtle adjustments so that you're balanced, so that you feel that sense of being awake and alert, and also truly at ease, comfortable. And you might let your attention go inward. Perhaps your eyes are downcast or closed. And invite yourself into presence. Sense that pathway that most allows you to know you're really here, right here. You might even say the word here. Perhaps you can feel the movement of the breath and extend the breath a little. Make it conscious and full, so you take a nice, deep, full in-breath right now. And match that with a slow, even, smooth out breath. And again, deep, full in-breath, filling the chest and the lungs. And a slow out breath, sensing the experience of letting go, the sensations of letting go. And again, inhale deeply. Slow out breath, releasing, relaxing outward, letting go. So that as you resume in your natural breathing, you can notice a deepened sense of presence. Let your senses be awake. Listening to the sounds, letting them wash through. And with that same receptivity, listening to and feeling the aliveness in your body. Intimate with sensations. And perhaps as you do, there's a gentle scanning to notice if there's any place inside you that wants to let go just a little bit more. Letting this simple intention be a gentle presence, a kind presence with what's right here. And into this presence, these are the words of poet Dana Faulds. In the refuge of your eyes, there can be no compromise with truth. The mind may dig to find what's lacking, but we are the love we long for. We are the love we long for. This outpouring of the heart, no end and no beginning, bigger than our deepest fear, fresh and clear in every moment. It's love that makes us whole. It's love that makes us whole.
Thank you, Tara. Yes, thank you for getting us in the space to kind of engage in this conversation that I know we've all been really looking forward to. So, yeah. Yeah, so to begin, um, when the opportunity to talk with you today came around, of course, it was like, well, we have so many questions. How are we going to possibly narrow it down to, an hour and 15 minutes? And so we've been kind of looking at some of the themes that are coming up in some of our classes, like kind of taking the temperature out there in the world. What's really alive for people right now that we might want to address. And I just came off teaching the IMCW New Year's retreat, which was really wonderful. And I also just taught this morning before this. So, I let my students this morning know that we were going to be together. And they're like, oh, ask her this, ask her that. So, trying to distill. And what really, there are themes, actually. There's kind of a common denominator to a lot of what folks are wanting to know and get your take on. And what, like, my distillation comes down to how we're in this, like, the shock has worn off in terms of the COVID disruptions and the upheaval in the world, in our country. I guess worn off isn't really the right word, but we've acclimated a little bit internally. And yet we're really tired. And it hasn't come back together again, right? So this dissolution has taken place and we've been in the stew for a while, but like no ground has come back underneath our feet. And so it's this sense of groundlessness and uncertainty, which of course is the whole of what we practice with and why we sit on this cushion regularly, so that we can cultivate this heart and mind that can handle what comes our way. But gosh, when the rubber hits the road and there's no ground, groundlessness is a wonderful concept. And then reality hits and it's like, gosh, do we try to get back to a new normal? Do we try to get some ground under our feet? So I was just wondering, just, out of the gate, if you have any thoughts on that very small and easy question.
Yeah, just a pesky little thing going on here. Yeah, but I think you're naming it. There's a sense that uncertainty is the thing we most fight against. This brain is a predicting machine, and the survival brain just wants to kind of know what the threats are around the corner and prepare for them. And when we're not able to do much predicting, it's scary and it's exhausting, because anything other than relaxing into groundlessness really leaves us wiped out. And I think that we're all still kind of buzzing on the something wrong feeling, and we're waiting. There's kind of a sense of a collective waiting, that we're on hold.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm looking at all of you now, if you can relate to that sense of we're waiting for, yeah, life to come back to something familiar. And that right now is not real life.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pause for station identification, and there's no identification. But you're right, we're ground-seeking creatures. And so what happens is there's other habits that then get triggered when we're in that anxious but not unsettled place. And often it's a lot of thinking and obsessive worry, and we create busyness, or else are really busy, but we get lost in it. We kind of speed up. We overconsume. We get more into conflict. There's more tension in relationships, And sometimes we just go on autopilot, so we don't have to feel that angst. So in effect, we're waiting for life. And here's what's sad, Trisha, that this is what gets me. is these life moments, we don't know how many we have. You know, it's like life is precious. And when we live as if we're waiting for something, um, we're missing out. We're not bringing our whole heart, our wholeheartedness to what's here. And, you know, there's here in the DC area, this snow, which is, you know, of course, an inconvenience and a horror for parents who are already struggling with everything about dealing with, you know, kids at home and so on. But there's also a beauty and a magic. It's been a beautiful snow, you know, but we kind of, somebody said it's our winter wonder advisory, you know, but we miss the life that's here. There's a friend of you might know him, I'm not sure, but a friend of ours doing the teacher training, and his wife got diagnosed with terminal cancer over this period and with very little time left. And it turns out she had, through her adult years, she was an amazing packer. In other words, she could fit anything into whatever box they had. And they decided together that this is the box that life was giving them, just this amount of time. And they intended to fit every bit into it, every moment of loving and appreciating and gratitude, just not waste it. And I just think of how brave that is when we're just in these circumstances, and how do we really live this? And part of the challenge is that part of living this means that we have to really get in touch with what's painful and what's going on. Really facing a lot of losses. You know, I'm aware, I don't know about you, but I haven't directly lost anyone to COVID. But during this period, I have several very dear people who are dying they're seriously ill and dying. And I have many, many friends who have lost friends. And so part of living the moment is just really opening to how it is. And I'll share one example that really inspired me about that. Was one man who, during the pandemic, and it's really hard to get sick with other things because of, you know, going into hospitals and stuff. And he had, he wrote to me, he said he had very aggressive prostate cancer. So huge dread. He's a dad of young kids, you know, he's 51 or something. Just a fear of losing everything he held dear. And he listened to a podcast and where I shared my own experience being in a hospital and facing real deep uncertainty, and that the words that helped me were to meet our edge and soften, just to keep meeting our edge and softening. And that by doing that, we become that spacious presence that has room, that compassionate presence that has room. And so he just let that be his practice. And it brought him to a place of real curiosity and presence, of real loving presence. And then just a few weeks ago, his son was diagnosed with melanoma. This is a young boy. And so, I mean, it just really, whew. So what they did, they revisited the book many of you know, Where the Wild Things Are. And if you remember, and this, his son, instead of walling off fear, took the guidance from that book, where, and here's a quote, which is, where you tame the wild things with magic, this magic trick of staring into their yellow eyes without blinking. And that's what his son took on as his practice. And I'm sharing these things because adversity is really hard, uncertainty is really hard. And yet, if we are willing to deepen our attention, this is what grows us. You know, we know this through the history of the species, that in all species, that those that in adversity adapt get stronger. So it's an invitation, an opportunity, and it's a really hard time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And as you're talking about ways to work with uncertainty, skillful ways to work with uncertainty and groundlessness, the thought crosses my mind, what's the alternative? I mean, this is, sort of like often, people who have a serious disease or have, something terrible happens in their life and people say, oh, you're so strong. Often the response is, well, what's the alternative? It's like, it's not so much being strong as it is meeting life on its own terms as it's arising. And I think that, many people on this call probably have a practice of some kind. And that it feels like that's what we're cultivating in the practice. Otherwise, what are we doing this for? If not to learn how to meet those edges. And, we know the alternative leads to suffering for ourselves and others. And yet the letting go into groundlessness feels so edgy, feels so uncomfortable. So it's this, I don't know. It's a day to day for me anyway. It's moment to moment that what there is to meet keeps changing. And so I don't know if there can be some kind of relaxing into that flow. I think that sometimes folks feel that if they relax into it, it's the same as accepting it. That accepting it, I should say, is the same as condoning it or saying, I don't care about that this is happening, I'm going to relax, or that somehow they're not doing their duty to, to stand up, or so there's so much nuance to it,
It's true. We definitely translate relaxing as either passivity that we shouldn't be doing, or else there's a sense that if we're not vigilant, something really bad will happen. So we're pretty reluctant to give up our obsessing minds. And, when you say, what's the alternative? That is totally true from an enlightened perspective. It's like we either are at war with reality, or we open to reality. And most of us have very subtle or not so subtle ways of going into trance as the alternative. So really, I think the invitation is, can we take an honest look at the ways we go into trance? Can we let that be part of the intention? That, oh, okay, so how am I distracting myself? How am I, what is it I'm unwilling to feel? What am I not willing to be with? But the other piece that's helped me is really getting what frees us. And, if each of you asked yourself the question, if you scan your life, just to identify 3 events that most shaped you. And if, you don't have to do it right now or journal on it right now, but just to think about that. And, were they happy, joyful events? Or were they some great loss or failure? And I know for myself, I think about that and I think, well, I was very shaped by an event I've written about, being betrayed by a spiritual teacher. I was very shaped by, getting very sick for 5-6 years and not thinking I was going to get well again. Those are things that force me to take refuge in a deeper way in truth and in love. So if we look at these times right now as just that these times are times that can really shape us. And I often think in a really kind of evolutionary way that, creatures have to adapt or else they don't pass their genes down. And right now, for the human species, our adaptation is a raising of consciousness. That's the only adaptation that can make a difference. We have to wake up our consciousness, which is what we're all doing. We have to directly wake up this capacity to sense our connection with each other, to love each other more fully, to collaborate, across the globe. I have no idea whether or not we'll make it or not as a species through what's going on, but I know the pathway is raising consciousness.
Yeah. It's a kind of good segue into another kind of thing that keeps arising is around, just in my class this morning, someone asked the question around, when people have really opposing views. So this can be really personal for us, like, and sometimes in our family. We've just come out of the holiday season, and I'm sure that many of you were gathered with people with conflicting views, and how to distinguish. Someone said, and so the question in my class this morning was, well, how do I maintain my integrity around my views? So he had views about gun control, and I can't let go of those views, because we were talking about like loosening our views. He's like, I can't. That's like a deeply held conviction that my practice has helped me to come to. So how do I be with someone who thinks the opposite of me? And so we had a discussion, and I this is one of the things I said, I'll ask Tara about that, just around, because my take was like, well, gosh, we have to talk to each other. We have to be willing to be open to understanding someone else's conditions that lead them to where they are, or we won't survive. We can't survive this kind of divisiveness when we take a stand and are unwilling to be changed in the heart, if not in the mind, by what someone else is saying to us, or we have to care. That was the thing. It was like, oh, we can't just give lip service to saying, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, or what's most meaningful for you about your conviction around guns or something. We have to be willing to understand and not come with an agenda. And that's where I think people feel like, oh, then I'm giving up then my flag is not planted anymore. And then am I like going to be in this current where I can be swept away by things I don't believe in? There's a fear around letting go of our convictions enough to meet the other person in the middle, in the heart space middle, at least. So, yes.
Well,
I will share the recording of this. Whatever.
Part of the problem with strong views is that we end up hating or disliking or thinking bad things about those that disagree, and that creates separation. And so I've had many, many people say, well, I've got, this person who's close into me who, voted this way and I'm voting this way, or this person is anti-vax and I'm, or whatever. And I can't let go of my judgment of them. So it's not only I can't let go of my view, it's like I can't let go of my aversion towards them. And one guy said, his brother and him had a major split after Trump became president, and they couldn't talk to each other. I mean, it was really, these are two brothers, and this is very common. This is not an uncommon story. And finally, about a year ago, he told me, he said, I just want to love my brother. And so we explored, what would make that possible for him to have, and as he explored it, and this is what's important, I think when we get caught in aversive judgment towards others for having different beliefs than us, we need to make what I call the U-turn and come back and say, okay, what's going on in that aversion in me? What's happening? And for him, the aversion was this fear that what his brother's beliefs in would translate to huge violence and suffering. And then when he kept on digging, okay, so that's what's there in their fear about violence and suffering. And under the fear was that he cared about our world and he cared about life. And so if he could, from that place of caring about life, then re-examine, okay, what can I do? How can I be on the planet? It becomes so clear, Trisha, from that place that hatred only breeds more hatred. And for so many of us, we're angry or hateful towards others because they're angry and hateful. And so it became really important to him, because he's a dedicated practitioner. Okay, this is it. It's like, it's fine to have the discerning wisdom that sees that another person's views can cause harm. We're not saying to lose that, but there's a real difference between discerning wisdom and aversive judgment. And this is the difference we really need to learn, each of us, by making that U-turn. And for him, what it did was he got clearer on what he cared about. He just as much saw the dangers in the views, but then he saw his brother as having views that were harmful, but not as badness. It's like there's a difference between a person with harmful views and a bad person. And he could then see again the goodness that he loved in them. And it makes me think of another friend of mine who lives in a college town that is surrounded by a rural area. The college town's more liberal, but the rural area isn't. And she has many, many neighbors who are anti-mask, anti-vax, and she's immunocompromised, and it's really affected. Even when things are lighter out there, she can't circulate. So she's felt a lot of anger and rage, kind of being imprisoned, the effect of other people's views. And she has neighbors who have very different views, but over time she's gotten to know, and she described one neighbor completely opposite end of the spectrum in terms of beliefs and politics. And this guy raised 4 beautiful kids. He's the most generous guy in the world. Anybody that needs help, he absolutely drops his life to step in and help them. She can't not see his goodness. So she said to me, Tara, I can't close my heart to him. And what I think is powerful about that, Trisha, is that there's a way in which waking up means we open to this paradox where we keep our heart open to the essential value and goodness in beings, and at the same time have the discerning wisdom to see how fear or ignorance or whatever can create so much suffering. And we have to be able to have hearts that are big enough for both.
Yeah. And the key piece that I heard you say, that, because I was thinking along with you in my own life, that lightened it for me was around the person with the judgment getting in touch with what was really true for them, which was their deep care and concern. And so that if that's the place that we can live from, instead of, the judgments may come and go, but that if we can stay in touch with that kind of deepest aspiration and the why of why we hold the beliefs we do, it might soften us enough to see that other people have that same heart. It could be the common ground that we make the connection through.
It's the necessary common ground. Mm-hmm. It's actually I think of what you just said as that's the next step. That's the hope. And Brian Stevenson, who's one of my my heroes in this world, he uses the word proximate. That we live in our kind of cocoons, our siloed groups, and most of us have very minimal contact with people that are very, very different from us. And as it gets more extreme, it's really demonizing others. I mean, I have never lived in a time where people from different parties really consider people from the other party as less moral or ethical, And so he basically says you have to get proximate. You have to actually get to know other people, to do just what you said, see that there are always going to be common places of caring. And when you can get that, then you have a place to build from. It's like Desmond Tutu, who just bless him. And he's been such an amazing guide for so many. He says, if you want peace, don't talk to your friends, talk to your enemies.
Mhm.
we need to do it, and it's a stretch, but we have to do it.
Yeah, that does definitely feel like the next step. And for me, it's felt like, well, we did try the other way. We got exhausted by it, and we see what the fruits of that have come to. We just look at, January 6th, and we can see the fruits of this conflict, and not just in political views or anything, but we see the fruits of things arising in our larger culture, in our ecology, in the environment, and all of these, social justice issues and things. It's come to bear, right? Like, we can really see it very clearly now. It's not an abstraction anymore. What doing it the other way does, that's, sort of like along the lines of what's the alternative. So now it's like getting into that zone of having to be more proximate or relational with people. And I think that people who have a practice, who meditate, certainly not just in the Buddhist tradition, but anyone with a deep contemplative practice that has compassion and interconnectedness as its base, that's such a gift to have those tools to fall back on or to rest in when you're tired. Not that we have to keep fighting, but just to kind of rest in that practice so that we can move forward, because we've got, there's a big conversation going on in probably the world, but definitely the United States. I'd say in the last few years, even, around whether our practice is directly linked. Is the Dharma linked to democracy? Or is the Dharma linked to social justice? Or what does the Dharma have to do with, global climate change? Like, is it worth it to bring these things into our practice, or is that getting political, or that's not what the Buddha meant? Or do you know what I mean? It's a hot topic right now. And so, yeah, any thoughts on I'm sure you have some thoughts on that, but
I'm passionate on it, actually. I
good.
mean, it's hard for me to imagine a spiritual path that separates out our inner work of waking up our hearts and minds for how we walk on this earth and in this world. It's kind of unfathomable. And I feel like it's been so beautifully modeled, that the togetherness of inner and outer, by whether it's Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. or Desmond Tutu, that it's been so beautifully modeled that the love we're waking up inside gets expressed. And if you think of it this way, if you were at war with yourself, a Dharma person would say, well, you need to learn to see what's going on and embrace your inner life. And if you're at war with your partner, then you see what's going on between you, and you bring that listening to the relationship. And why wouldn't it naturally extend to the wider society when we see the different ways that in our wider society that people are either being violated or denied their rights due to their sexual orientation or gender identity or their race or religion? Doesn't the Dharma guide us out of compassion to engage as best we can with that reality too? I mean, it's part of reality. So, when I examine the pushback, because I get it every time I talk about the suffering of racism or the suffering of non-human animals, or any of these areas. There are people that will email me saying, I was coming to touch some calm and peace, and you're bringing up divisive issues. And I think there's a real misunderstanding that spiritual practice is about calming ourselves down. It certainly has that capacity,
Right.
but not by avoiding reality. It's really by opening our entire heart and being bravely to reality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And it kind of strikes me that in in many religions, or spiritual paths, there are teachings on turn the other cheek or live without preferences. There are teachings that can be used to spiritually bypass. But there's also always teachings about the compassion teachings and the, treat everyone like you want to be treated. Like those are, they can seem to be kind of opposite. And yet it's kind of how we are applying them. And that the fallback has to be the heart practice, has to be like the liberative quality. Like, how do you feel when you totally ignore a whole segment of society or nature or whatever? Where does that lead to? So, it's such an interesting conversation. I love to hear, folks from the whole spectrum kind of talk about this, because I think we all learn about how the Dharma actually is. It's inextricably linked to everything we do. So, yeah, and especially when we're talking about the suffering of others.
That's right.
Human or non-human or planetary. So, yeah. So we're going to get to questions in a minute, but just one last theme that seems to be out there a lot is the relationship to faith or trust or hope. They can be sometimes used interchangeably, sometimes not, in the Buddhist tradition, because it's coming out now more as a topic. I think Sharon Salzberg has a book even coming out about it, about faith. But it seems to me like there has to be a trust in something unseen. If we're only relying on our, senses and these brains to figure it out, I don't know what's going to happen. Seems like there is an element of faith that we might just call trust in the practice or trust in the order of things. But I don't know if that plays a role in how that unfolds in your own life in working with these practices.
Yeah. And I love this inquiry. What can we trust, or what can we have faith in? And what does it really mean to hope? I just feel like these are actually very alive right now, because so many people are feeling so discouraged. And I do want to name that it's hard. I mean, it's hard to face what's going on to this earth and know how deep the danger is, or face the degree of suffering. And I'm just so aware that unprocessed fear means violence and more suffering, and it's rampant right now. So it's hard to know all that and to say, well, what can I have faith in? What can I trust? And my mantra now, almost, I would call it a mantra. The reminder I most use for myself when I feel like I've gotten small is to trust the gold. It's to trust the inherent goodness of awareness and love. And it's really points to what you were talking about, that no matter what the coverings look like, what the shapes of the waves look like, there is a field of loving awareness that's what I am and you are and we all are. It's our source. And if we trust that, we can go to our deaths and we can experience losses, and we'll grieve like all humans grieve, but we'll be okay. And if we can trust that, we actually live from it more. And I feel like, the Buddha talked about this in a different way. This is one of the quotes that I really love, is if it were not possible to free the heart from entanglement, I would not teach you to do so. And just because it's possible to free the heart, there are the teachings of the Dharma of liberation. So it's just like one of my favorite quotes. This wouldn't exist if it weren't possible, this pathway of freeing ourselves. And it's possible because we already are the love we long for.
Mm-hmm.
It's already the truth. The awareness that's listening right now is the same awareness in all of us, and it's here. And it's vast, and it's formless, and it's timeless. And there's trusting in that. What we're trusting in, and this is where hope comes in. We can only hope for really our potential to manifest who we are. That's what hope is, that we're hopeful that we can manifest that love and bring it fully out, that we can manifest that wisdom. Let me read you. I wrote a note to myself. I want to read you this. This is a Barbara Kingsolver. And she says this: here's what I've decided. The very least you can do in your life is figure out what you hope for. And the most you can do is live inside that hope, not admire it from a distance, but live right in it, under its roof. What I want is so simple, I almost can't say it. Elementary kindness.
Mm.
So what it says is that hope has kind of two qualities. And one is that it's not about some abstract thing. It's really about the hope that we can manifest the potential that's here, right here. And the second quality is that we put energy towards that we live inside it. And it has the quality of heart. It's what we really care about. It's kindness.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, that's worthy of a pause to let that sink in. No, thank you. So as we kind of move into taking some questions, thank you for everyone who's submitted a question. We'll get to as many of them as we can. So the first question I have is from, is it Di? And the last name is Bly. I'm going to go ahead and read the question, but we'll let Tara, you can come on screen and answer it. Hi, Di. Why is it so hard in relation to climate emergency and the immense suffering already taking place to start a conversation in any Sangha about civil resistance or activism, especially given that our compassion, our refuge in the Dharma, is all about individual freedom from suffering? Did I read that correctly, Di? Is there anything you'd change about that?
Yes, I think you missed the key thing, which was, especially given that our compassion, our refuge in the Dharma, is, as here until Tara's last comment, all about freedom from individual suffering. And I just give a little bit of background. I've been fortunate in working with the work that reconnects, which is Joanna Macy's marvelous teaching. And I've also been blocking motorways with Insulate Britain throughout the autumn, and I'm imminently expecting prison sentences. And I sort of imagined, as there are 3-4 of us in the Dharma out of 150 activists, that we would be able to speak in Sanghas about the extension of compassion, particularly to the immense suffering that's already happening in the global south. And so far, we have either had no audience or we have had an embarrassed silence. So I live in a way that tries very hard. I try very hard to be compassionate and understanding about why this topic is so hard for people to think about, but I simply don't understand why it isn't even possible to begin a conversation.
Let me ask you, Di, if you sense into it, what do you imagine is going on?
What I imagine is going on is that people are frightened, full of fear, when they begin to look at the reality of what is happening. That's my first imagining. The second imagining is that people feel essentially powerless, that as individuals, they can't do anything about what does require, after all, our leaders to start behaving compassionately and together. So I think fear and powerlessness is what I imagine I'm encountering.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, by the way, relating this with that good mind of yours. Yeah, I would only add that the more people are preoccupied with getting through the day themselves, it's the hierarchy of needs, the less they're able to respond to the larger swaths of suffering. And I think all three are pretty charged up right now. The issues seem horrific. I see it the most, I mean, it's amazing that we've been not looking climate change in the face for so long. It seems so big to people, like, what can I do? And when you say the global south, it's, oh my gosh. I mean, it's like if you sense the world in your heart, there's this huge part of your being that is just struggling in a horrific way. It's like, so I think those three things are real. And what feels important, like, is, well, how do we respond to that? And I think there is a growing response from the Dharma community. It's just slow. And that we hold hands where it does exist, and we deepen it, and we really remind each other that we're in it together, because it's easy to lose heart if we think that we're the only one, out, waving our arms for something. And there are a growing number of people who really care and who are acting. So I think we have to find those people and invite others in. The other thing I would say is that there actually are things people can do that don't take them necessarily into other worlds and have them ignore their own lives. And I think that's part of what we need to be able to explore together. Like, how can we each in our own way, in some way, act in a way that can make a difference? We can eat differently. I mean, it's like we can just shift our diet a little bit. I just gave a talk on, actually it hasn't come out yet, it'll come out soon, on, the animal cruelty and our globe and our environment. And it all links into the global poor and those that are most suffering. And if each of us, I'm not saying everybody go vegan, those that want to and can, great, but if each of us leaned more towards plant-based eating, that is something we can do. What I'm saying is there are things we can do that are more incremental. So, so I want to pause here and say, how is this landing, and any other thoughts?
As you might imagine, I'm fairly deeply acquainted with the science of climate change. And Sir David King, who's a very eminent climate scientist, says we have 3 to 4 years to determine the future of humanity. Now, I wish that he would say to determine the future of humanity and all living beings, but he doesn't say that. And so for me, the notion of individual lifestyles is pretty dangerous because it creates the illusion of action. So we have, in our activism, we have a strong belief in not judging. So, for example, if people are taking a plane to do something, like that, or eating meat twice a week, or whatever it is, then what we're interested in, what we want them to do, is civilly resist. What we want them to do is risk going to prison. What we want them to do is be with us in the only form of action. I was interested that you quoted Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Desmond Tutu, because so do we. We use their wise compassion in many of the meetings that we hold. And in many of the meetings that we hold, people join us. It happened just last night, but not in the Sanghas, not in the Sanghas.
I hear the difference you're making between individual action and collective action that is stepping forward when there's so little time. And I'm just holding them both right here in my heart because I get it. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, we have another question from Sudhir Krishnan, and I'll paraphrase it, but then he can flesh it out a little bit more. Hi, Sudhir. Thank you. How do we push back on bad views, which are often propagated as the means to wield power? Yeah. Yeah. Sudhir, do you want to flesh that out a little bit for Tara? Thank you.
Yeah, I would try to. Thank you, Tara, for giving this opportunity. Mainly, it was like years ago when I was listening to some of the Dharma talks by Stephen Batchelor. I think I'm excited to meet him next month as well. So this is where I learned that when during the time of Buddha, he himself was like very much active in the then current political activities. As I learned, the Buddha has been involved in resolving conflicts between the people, and his main intention was to lessen the suffering of the people, even if it is talking between the kings, or he's doing some kind of acting as a bridge between two powers. So, but in the contemporary Buddhism, I wouldn't claim myself as a Buddhist, but I'm definitely intrigued and interested in it. What I see is more like a personal salvation and liberation, which is by no means is less than anything else. But I would see that I think we kind of lost the original intention of the Buddha, where he actually acted in terms of reducing the suffering. I think my question is more directly linked to what the previous person was talking about, that collective activism. I think that is kind of lost on Buddhism. So I was just wondering, what is your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I agree with you. I mean, I do. I feel like, especially in the West, when Buddhism was first brought here, it was brought into a very individualistic, capitalistic, hierarchical, male dominance. Not all that's different from the East, but the individualistic is, and that the waking up is that who we are is not who we think we are. We're not. If our identity is with this individual body, mind, and its salvation, we're on the wrong track. The true salvation is waking up to realize our collective awareness, the love that is really our source, and act on behalf of the whole, the greater good. So I'm agreeing with you. And I see that as the trajectory that's happening. And it's slow. And as Dee points out, it may be too slow for the human species and other non-human animals to make it. But we have to just keep on caring and trying. Thank you so much, Sudhir.
Thank you, Sudhir. Yeah, so this theme around the individual and the collective is such an interesting one. That is also a hot topic, kind of as you're saying, about how we in the West have taken the Dharma and made it adapted it to our, dominant culture, West, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and everything's going to be fine kind of society, and how to, I think it's one of the turnings that's happening right now is toward a more collective. So yeah, thank you for those questions. So Jill has a question for you, Tara. if we can bring her up on screen, is a 4th grade elementary public school teacher. First of all, pause. And you're surrounded by multiple challenges and multiple themes. So your question is to how do you can be a role model and an open-hearted compassion without preaching and directly instructing to not only my students, but fellow teachers and parents as well. Yeah, so I'm going to turn that over to you to flesh out a little bit more. Thank you, Jill.
You're still muted.
Hold on, Jill. Let's get you unmuted.
Now you got it.
Been doing this so many times. I'm always bad at unmuting. Anyway, thank you both. This has been amazing. And you've hit on so many things already. As I was typing my question, I'm like, okay, yes. I'm in a classroom in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I have 28 students. And I have to say, I've initially went back to teaching after 30 years of being out of the classroom. I'm just now returning. So it is a different world. So exciting, so daunting in many ways. But what I'm hearing from the collective, I think, is the children. And if we can hit this population starting, this is what needs to be happening. I know they're still young, but they aren't covered over by all of the things that I am role modeling in class without doing direct teaching. They're saying to me, we have a moment of, we call it catching our breath every morning in our morning meetings. And my students are saying so many of the things that I've heard in Dharma talks. And these are 4th graders. These are 10-year-olds. The wisdom from 10-year-olds is amazing. How do I keep them from getting covered over with all of the minutia? And how do I keep them from the identity of the individual and keep a collective sense? That's my question for you.
Wow. It's a beautiful question. It feels to me like if we could just center on this, that's where the hope is. And I often think of the Dalai Lama saying, if every 8-year-old could learn to meditate or be mindful, there wouldn't be war in the next generation. And what I'm hearing from you is that their consciousness really is fresh and open, and there is care there. And how do you nurture it? So I'll name a few things that come to mind, but I first want to ask you, what have you found so far is helpful in nurturing it from your end? What are you already exploring on this?
Sorry about that. So I use Headspace on a daily basis with my kids. And as I said, we start off with a catching your breath. I don't talk about meditation. I've given my children the option to participate or not. It's a silent moment, and it's 5 minutes. And we listen to Andy Putty come, and I just say, we're going to have Andy come in and share with us, or, we've used some different teachers. But the kids are very receptive to it. And the messages, I started using just children kind of centered, but I switched over to the regular everyday messages that Andy Puttycombe shares. And the kids are they eat it up. They have amazing contributions. And I'm saying high to low across my student body. It's my kids are respectful and they see the importance. So I am doing my very best to try and keep a sense of the direction being, you guys are in a year where we are building you as whole people. This is, so yes, all of the learning your math and learning, this is all important, but it's, let's go back every day. We go back to what is kindness and compassion and respect for your world and respect for your, and those are just the constant themes I bring up. I don't go beyond that. I let the kids then filter all of their messages, because it comes they're much more receptive from their peers than they are even at 10 than they are from me. And I'm being guided in particular by 3 or 4 of my students who just have such delicious and insightful contributions that I don't need to do a whole lot, but I want to continue to do that. And so if you have thoughts, either, you or Trish, on that, I'm welcome.
And the reason I asked you to speak some more, Jill, is because what you're describing is so inspiring. It's way more inspiring than me from outside of the classroom could ever be. All I want to do is highlight some of the things you said, which is you're trusting them and trusting their goodness. And for you to keep letting them know that you trust them and trust their goodness, the deepest message you can give them is that you see them and you love what you see. And as you said, they listen more to each other. So to the degree you can invite them to give feedback to each other about what they liked and what inspired them, what they thought was really cool about what another person said. And to the degree that you can start to create a safe enough environment for them to say what's challenging and what's helping for them. So they actually develop that kind of a supporting each other, inviting them to take turns being the wise teacher that can offer some suggestions, that role play that. And so basically what you're cultivating is a sense of you're good, you can trust your goodness, and you can be mirrors to each other of that goodness.
That's beautiful. That's perfect. And one other thing I drew from, and whether you're aware of it or not, something that occurred to me as you were saying that, is that my students, my fear is that they will get covered up. This beautiful gold will get covered up going down the line. And how do I impress upon them that you are awake right now? You guys are aware and you're conscious right now. Don't let it get buried. How?
Yeah. Tell them the story of the Golden Buddha, which I can tell you know.
I do
but
know. Yes.
Tell them it, and teach them a little way to each day remind themselves of the gold in themselves and see the gold in each other. Like, just create that as one of the games, invitations, challenges, and fun place they pay attention. But mostly, I want to say, they will get covered up. Continue to trust them anyway, because we all get covered up.
Right.
And so your fear about them getting covered up is a little contagious too. So,
right.
So keep track of that and know it's not going to be perfect, but there's a whole lot of hope in this. And if you're in the mood, I'd love you to send me some of what your children are telling you, because Beautiful. It's the kind of thing I'd like to share with the world.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Jill. Big bow to you.
Yeah, I know. That was so inspiring just to hear about the kids who, 4th, 5th grade, 9, 10 years old, they're so wise. And we worry about them so much, but I don't know. Thank you, Jill. That was, my heart needed to hear some of that this morning. Yeah, we'll take one more. We just have a couple of minutes. Allison, I don't know if you want to come on the screen. Allison had a comment question about equanimity. Hey, Allison. Playing a part in how we meet those with different views, like how the practice of equanimity can address our fear of being open-minded. Is that the gist, Allison?
Basically, I just find that when you were talking about how you approach people, first of all, oh my God, it's such an honor, Tara, to even have a conversation with you. So thank you. When we're talking about people having difficult conversations with people that they love and are connected to, and it seems now that there's this heightened level of emotion, rawness that is coming through in these conversations, whereas even 5 years ago, you could have a conversation and hear someone else's views with sort of an objectivity. And now there's this fear, and I spend a lot of time in my life trying to figure out where that fear comes from. It was really helpful what you said about that man processing his fear of, that suffering that his brother's views could create, but then below that, connecting to the love of the commonality of the love and compassion. But I find that there seems to be a fear of people being afraid that their minds might change a little, that their views are so much, they've identified so closely with those views that they are afraid to open their mind to the possibility that there is another side, that maybe there's more place to meet in the middle. So I've been trying to work with my own practice in that space of equanimity, where you can ride the waves and sort of step back as almost a third objective view to try to find that middle. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I love that we're actually ending on this note of equanimity, because it's our superpower and it takes cultivation. Usually we have to cultivate it a bit on the sidelines when we're in the thick of a situation. The best we might be able to do is say, breathe deeper. And I usually tell myself, don't believe your thoughts, and don't believe your thoughts, and don't believe your thoughts, just because I'm just trying to be. But on the sidelines, we can do a lot to cultivate that refuge of equanimity, which is just as you say, to see where the grasping is, to say, what is it I'm really unwilling to feel? What am I afraid of? And it's again, that groundlessness. Here's the thing. Fear is trying to protect us. It's not necessarily doing a good job of it. It's misguided, but it's trying to protect us. So I find it really helpful just to acknowledge that. Thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm okay. And there's something in that kind of recognition of what's real, that it's here and it's trying to protect me, that in the moment of recognizing, and this is the magic of mindfulness, the what we are opens to a larger space. We become that witness. We regain that superpower of equanimity. So practice on the sidelines. Start with exactly what's here. Don't try to prematurely transcend it and say, oh, I'm just going to be equanimous. Start with what's here, but befriend it, be interested in it, acknowledge it, and you'll find there'll be a natural opening into more space. And that is the space of equanimity.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Allison.
Wonderful question.
Yeah. Yes. Allison's an MMTC peer, Tara.
Ah, yay. Lovely to know it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, friends, we are at the end of our time. Tara, just want to say a few closing words before I close us out?
I would. What I'd like, because I know how many of us really honor and love Desmond Tutu, and because of his recent passing, and because of the things that we've been talking about, I just want to read something from him. And so you might close your eyes for a moment and feel the breath at the heart. And just notice that it's really possible in this moment to be intimate with your own heart. And in that way, become open into heart space. And here's what he says. He says, at no point will evil and injustice and oppression and all the negative things have the last word. And yes, there's no question about the reality of evil, of injustice, of suffering. But you know, at the center of this existence is a heart beating with love. That you and I and all of us are incredible. I mean, we really are remarkable things, that we are, as a matter of fact, made for goodness. At the center of this existence is a heart beating with love. And to the degree, friends, that we can entrust ourselves towards that, trust that what we're longing for is the love that we already are, that we are this heart beating with love, our lives will become an expression of that. And that's what will ripple out and be of healing to our world. So, namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And thank you, everyone, for your presence today. And we hope to see you maybe even next month with, I need to unmute myself. Am I unmuted? Okay, I'm so sorry. None of us are going to get this right. We'll be done with Zoom by the time we all figure it out. I don't know how much you heard or did not hear, but I'm thanking you and inviting you to come back next month for Stephen Batchelor, and to also thank you again for your donations for this series. It's so wonderful to be with you every month. So take care, everyone. Yes, be well. Thank you.